Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be creating a cat eye study using just 3 coloured pencils and a white pencil for blending. This is a really great exercise to do because it really gets you used to looking at tones and contrasts and also creating something with limited supplies. I always say to my students that you don't need all of the colours in order to create something that looks realistic, and hopefully this piece showcases that for you. I've previously made a similar type of video on this subject which features some slightly different colours, which I will link below for you guys if you want to check that one out too after this. For this study I have used polychromos colours, which are light chrome yellow, cadmium orange and manganese violet. The white pencil that I've used for blending is the Prismacolor Premiere. Other materials such as paper, sharpeners and all that jazz are listed below if you want to check out my equipment. The reference photo image for this can also be found on Pixabay, and I'll also link that as well. So if you guys are limited on supplies and feel like you can't make good realistic studies, then that is totally not true. It really kind of does help in the long run to have a lot of colours and all of that kind of stuff, because obviously the more colours you have, then the less time you have to spend blending your coloured pencils. But if you only have like a set of 12 polychromos colours and you think you can't create something, then you absolutely can, and this is basically what this video is going to explain to you. So as I said, I've got 3 colours for my study here, and what I've done before I actually started this was I looked at the reference photo and I identified all of my light, dark and mid-tones. And what you really kind of need to do when you do have a limited palette is to assign each colour to one of those tonal values. So depending on how many colours you're actually using, in my case I'm using 3, so I'm going to give you this example, you would apply your 3 colours to 3 different tones within your reference photo or whatever you're kind of thinking of drawing. So you would assign, say, the purple to the dark tones, the yellow to the light tones and the orange to the mid-tones. And what really helps in creating this kind of artwork is having both a colour reference photo and a black and white reference photo. It's really good to have that black and white reference photo because it shows the kind of true tonal values and you can see everything in grayscale. And sometimes it's a lot easier to look at a grayscale image when you have a limited palette, and especially when you are using colours which are not true to the reference photo. So obviously my reference photo here, if you've had a look at it, is of a white and kind of grey tabby cat, and obviously it isn't purple, orange and yellow. So for this study I mainly used a black and white reference photo and just gathered all of the tones and all of those different values on the black and white reference photo rather than the colour one. Obviously if you have like a larger range of colours that you want to work with, perhaps you want to work with 5 different colours, then what you could do is pick out 5 different tonal values within your reference photo and then assign those 5 colours to the different tones. So you can kind of do this kind of method with any number of colours that you have, and this works really well when you do want to create something a little bit wacky and a little bit kind of wild but still keep that kind of realistic look as well. So obviously this study isn't like realistic in the sense of the colours, but it's still realistic in the way that the colours are applied and the kind of strokes and the methods that I've used with the pencils. So you can see that I'm kind of starting with the eyes here, and you see that I have used the purple pencil to denote the really dark areas, the yellow for the light and the orange for the mid-tones. So what I like to do is start by adding in some of the darker tones like I would do with any kind of other coloured pencil portrait. I usually use a dark sepia for the dark tones, but in this case I just went in with the purple, outlined the eye and added in all of the dark areas. Then what I decided to do was go in and add some of the lighter areas, so using that yellow pencil. And when I'm using the yellow pencil for the lighter tones, I'm not going in with a heavy pressure or putting like a load of pigment down on the paper. I'm just using a really light pressure, just going in with really gentle layers, barely putting kind of any pigment on the paper at all, but I still want that kind of like subtle yellow sheen to the paper. And this is where a white pencil comes in really handy. If you don't have like a whole bunch of pencils but you do have a core set of 12, I would really recommend making sure that that set of 12 has a white pencil because it's really invaluable for blending and lightening your colours. So for the yellow kind of highlight area, obviously a highlight usually includes some kind of blue or greens or something like that. I just used straight up yellow, and then I lightened it by going in with my Prismacolor white pencil, and I got this really, really nice, really kind of translucent-y kind of lemon yellow colour, which was really nice. And then that paired really well with the kind of dark tones that I was getting from the purple. So using a white pencil to lighten your pencils is a really invaluable technique as well. So if you only have 12 pencils, make sure that that 12 pencils includes a white pencil, or if your set that you're thinking of buying doesn't include a white, then make sure that you purchase a white separately, because that's a really invaluable tool for your coloured pencil work. So obviously it's fairly easy to kind of add the dark tones down and add the light tones down because you've got those two pencils there. The tricky part comes, I think, when you're trying to add the mid-tones, because the mid-tones can be kind of hard to identify, and if you're only using like 3 pencils like I am here, then the mid-tone values kind of cover a whole range of areas. So if we look at my case here, I said it's obviously a tabby cat. Now the lights and the darks are really obvious because I've got white fur, that's obviously going to be a light section, and I've got dark areas of fur which are obviously like usually filled in with a dark sepia, but in this case a purple. But I've also got areas within the white that is kind of a little bit dark, and I've also got areas where it's kind of like gingery and almost like a kind of darker brown. So the mid-tone values can get a little bit confusing to add. But as long as you keep in mind like the yellow for the lighter tones and the purple for the darker tones, and kind of add those in first and then kind of fill in any gaps with the orange, then that's the kind of way to go here. And also don't forget that you can layer these coloured pencils on top of one another, so you can layer the yellow and the orange to get a kind of more yellowy orange look. You can layer the orange and the purple to get an even deeper purple, which is what I did around the eyes. You can see that some of the colours around the eyes are getting quite dark, and that's because I just layered orange and purple together. It created almost like a brown tone. So don't forget that you can also layer the colours on top of one another. You're not limited to just using areas of yellow, areas of purple and areas of orange. You can blend them together to create really interesting tones and interesting techniques as well. And this is especially what you need to do when you're working on something like fur, because obviously you're going to have to layer your darker colours or your darker tones over your lighter tones in order to create a really nice kind of effective, almost tabby fur effect. So in my case here, what I basically did was I just put down a base layer of yellow, and I blended that with a white pencil, so I kind of got a lighter yellow tone, and then I built in the mid-tones. So we're kind of working like we would with a kind of standard portrait. Usually you'd work with your lighter colours, go to your mid-tone colours or your sort of mid-area colours, and then move on to your darker colours for your final details. That's the same principle that I followed here. So started with that yellow, added a nice base layer, followed all of the fur direction and everything like that, and then I added in areas of orange, and then I added in areas of purple as well. So with the yellow, obviously that's going all over, that's your base. With the orange, you're kind of not going all over, you're kind of leaving the gaps of the yellow here and there so that it kind of shows through. So you've got these lighter specks showing through, kind of like you can see the skin underneath the fur. And then with the purple tone or your darker tone, you're going in and you're adding it really sparingly, so you're creating really kind of small areas of shadow and really tiny fur details, so the shadows in between each of the little strands of fur and that kind of thing. And I think that if you treat your limited palette and use the limited palette in exactly the same way as you would a standard portrait, then you can't really go wrong. So you just want to follow the basic colour pencil principles of using the lighter colours first, then the midtones, and then the darks, and that's pretty much all that there is to it. It might seem like a really daunting process and a daunting thing to just use 3 colours and to get a realistic effect, but if you just follow your principles of using light to dark and using light layers and building different tones and layering different colours on top of one another, you're going to create some really interesting, really kind of wacky looking portrait, especially if you're using wild colours like I have here. And you don't necessarily need to use like a different set of colours, like the oranges and the purples and everything that I've used to create kind of an unrealistic look. Perhaps you might have like some yellows and some browns, and you think, oh, I don't quite have enough browns or quite enough yellows to create an interesting and sort of diverse portrait. You absolutely can. You literally would only need like a yellow, a brown, and perhaps you've got a dark sepia. Then you've got 3 different colours that you can assign to those tones and create something realistic. And again, as long as you use those light base layers of your lighter tone, so obviously that would be a yellow in that case, as long as you're putting down the yellow and then lightly layering up the brown for the mid-tone, and then going in and adding the dark areas on fur specifically with your dark sepia, then you're good to go. You don't need a whole range of browns and a whole range of everything. One little trick that I do have for you guys is to make sure that when you are assigning your different colours to your different tonal values, is to make sure that you write them down. It might seem like a kind of obvious thing to do, but I've done this previously and I've kind of forgotten which I used for my light, mid-tones and darks, and just kind of made a bit of a hash of the portrait. So I always make sure that I write them down. It might seem like a really ridiculous thing to do, but if you are spending long amounts of time away from your particular piece that you're working on and coming back to it, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to get into the kind of headspace of this particular kind of exercise. So just having a little reminder, a little written memento of kind of what tones you used for what colours can be really helpful. As far as the actual fur texture is concerned for this piece, I'm not going to go into too much detail of how to create the fur lines because I've got so many videos on my channel related to that kind of thing. I'll leave a playlist link as a card up above if you want to check out how to draw particular types of fur. But basically, as you can see what's going on screen now, I just used the yellow for the base layer, and then I used some more layer to define some of the darker areas, went over with the orange as I explained earlier, like just going from your lighter tones through to your darker tones. And just using various pressures on the pencil as well to build up some of the base layers. But the actual fur technique, as I said, I'll leave a link to a playlist of all of the fur videos that I have, and it shows exactly how to do that really realistic fur technique in those for you guys. I am such a big fan of these particular types of studies and exercises because it really does get you used to looking at a reference photo and being able to identify the values and the contrasts, which is always the key to a realistic drawing. It's not necessarily all about the colours, it's all about those contrasts and getting those values developed correctly. As I mentioned in the beginning of this video, I mainly worked from a black and white reference photo for this, and just kind of every now and then looked at my colour reference. And when you're looking at a black and white reference and the colour at the same time, you can use the black and white image to translate into the colour image so that you can develop your understanding of how different areas look and how different areas work together. So obviously the black and white image takes away all of the confusion of all of those colours, which can sometimes kind of cloud your artist's brain. I know a lot of questions that I get on my channel and from my students is, how do I pick colours, or how do I identify colours and base colours and all that. But if you're looking at a black and white reference photo, that kind of eliminates that, and just practicing building a realistic kind of texture or realistic study like this with just a limited palette and just identifying those tones, I think is a really fundamental skill and a practice that you kind of really need to develop. And I really encourage all of you guys watching this, especially if you're watching this far through, to go and have a practice at this, because it's a really fun exercise. It may seem daunting, but as soon as you get into the kind of swing of it and you kind of get the feel of how to use the colours in conjunction with one another, it becomes a really fun exercise. And I may even do some more of these in some different colours, because previously I've kind of done a study that's kind of a similar colour, and I kind of want to do a study that's kind of green, blue and maybe orange, like a two cool tones and a warm tone. That would be quite an interesting one to do. If you guys do want to follow along with this, if you want a little bit of hand holding and want to see it in real time, then the full 2.5 hour video is available on my website and to my Patreon subscribers as well. If you fancy checking that out and following along and creating your own tonal study like this, then I'll leave the link and everything in the description below for you guys. So that's pretty much it for this video. I really hope that you guys found this helpful, and especially to you guys that don't always have a load of supplies at hand, I really hope that this has given you some inspiration to create something. And just keep in mind the fact that you don't need a whole bunch of expensive supplies to do this either. That's kind of what I want the takeaway of this video to be. If you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an upload, as I post new arty goodness every single Friday for you guys. I'm also starting to release some videos on Wednesdays as well, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you can be the first to watch those as well. That's all from me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!